Hey everybody, this is Richard with the Hunter-Gatherer Society, and I want to take a minute to talk to you a little bit about one of my favorite beginner mushrooms, and one that, truthfully, I started harvesting even when I was a young kid with my grandmother. And it's a great one to start with because it's easy to identify. It's not a mushroom that has a real distinct flavor in most cases. So for someone who's just starting it, just starting out and who's a little nervous about mushroom hunting, this is one that you can identify easily. It's something that, most people have seen before. And again, when they go to eat it, it's not something that's going to be, it's not going to have a real distinct flavor or texture. It's going to be easy for their palate, right out of the gate. Probably one of the most common ones that we see is the Western lawn puffballs. Now, these are found throughout the world, and they're often, these are the ones you're going to see oftentimes in the lawn or on golf courses in fields. They have the white tannish top. It wears away, usually exposing kind of a metallic brown spore. I actually just found these recently for the first time in Florida while camping, and that was one of the kind of key signs that this is the mushroom that I had, was that kind of metallic color at the top. And you find them all the way from spring into late autumn. The one I found was, I think, in early August, I believe, just kind of maybe the first week or so of August. And like a lot of these white puffballs, they're edible, but the key to this is the flesh has to be white. So that's really what's nice about these puffball mushrooms. When you see those growing in the lawn, growing in the grass, if long as it's an area that hasn't been sprayed with anything, you can pluck those up, take a pocket knife, cut it in half. If it's all white inside, that's an edible puffball mushroom. Now, this puffball is kind of mediocre. It's not a great edible. It really has no distinct flavor. Now, after saying that, I'm going to say that's actually what makes it kind of appealing as a starter mushroom. A lot of times people, they say they don't like mushrooms, they don't like the flavor, the texture, they're slimy, whatever the case may be. This is a great one to start with because you can take this and cut it up into little slices, saute it in some butter and salt, get it a little bit crispy, nice and golden brown, and it's a great introduction to the difference in wild mushrooms versus the store-bought ones that that they're probably grew up with and learned to not like. So a great starter mushroom for people. And then another one of my personal favorites. Now again, remember, anytime you're dealing with a mushroom species, depending on who you ask, the answer may vary. So some people will tell you some of these are great edibles, some will tell you they're mediocre edibles, some will say they don't bother with them. But the pear-shaped puffball is one that I found a lot in Minnesota, and especially in the fall. Late summer, early fall, I would find this quite often. You're going to find it growing on like logs and stumps, things like that. It's really these puffballs are found throughout the world. Now, again, on logs, stumps, wood debris in the fall, often you're going to find it in clumps or compacted groups. You rarely find just a few, just a couple of them. You're going to find them in a large group, so they're pretty easy to spot when you do see them. And again, just like the lawn mushroom, the field mushroom, these are edible. Again, when you cut them in half, if that flesh is white, this is an edible puffball mushroom. I really enjoy this one. It's very similar to the lawn puffball. There's not a real strong, distinct flavor to it. It makes another great starter mushroom. It's really fun to find, and again, super easy to palate, especially for someone just kind of getting into the mushroom hunting world. Now, anybody who's mushroom hunted for a while and has looked for puffballs hopefully has a story about the giant puffball. These are fabulous to find, right? You're in the woods or maybe you're in a field and you see this soccer ball sitting there, or by a tree or something like that. And it just kind of gets, if you're a mushroom hunter, it gets your blood pumping to find these. Now, you can find these alone. I found them singly, but I've also found them in groups, even in fairy rings. But these are a large puffball. I mean, they're unmistakable. I mean, they can get massive. And these are actually a choice edible. And man, if you find one of these, cut it in half, make sure it's good and white, And then, this is one you want to take home. Now, again, you're going to find it in woods, pastures. You might find it in urban areas. This is going to grow in probably late May all the way into October. But now remember too, when I'm saying these seasons and months and things like that, this depends on your area. So northern Minnesota is probably significantly more, different than southern Florida as far as when you're going to find different species, whether it's puffballs or chanterelles or any of those. So this is really just an overview of some of these edible mushrooms, these puffballs, so that if you're out in the woods and you spot these, you feel comfortable with them. And again, for those of you just getting started in mushroom hunting, these are very common in a lot of areas, so they're a great one to go look for, especially in the late summer, early fall. And again, easy to find, easy to identify, easy on the palate. They're just a super fun mushroom. And when you find your first giant puffball, you've got a story to tell. So this is a great puffball. By the way, I'm not using the scientific names. For those of you that prefer that, Latin was never my thing in school, so I use the common names. My grandmother used the common names. She didn't run around using scientific names when she picked mushrooms, so I stick with that as well. But I have provided them here, just for those that are so inclined. I added one more. The blog I put out recently had 3 puffballs. I did add one more, which is the MOSAIC puffball. This is another good edible when it's young. It's also another one that'll get fairly large. This one can get up to about 10 inches across. And it's kind of squat in appearance, and it's somewhat pear-shaped. It prefers sandy soil. Now, my first giant puffball that I found wasn't actually a giant puffball. It was actually the MOSAIC puffball. And I found this in northern Minnesota. It was in a field. I had driven by, and when I say these are big, right? I'm driving by and I could see this thing out in this edge of this field, and I'm like, wow, what is that? And so about the third time I drove by that field, I'm like, because I was out there, we were messing around, kind of camping out there that weekend, and I got to stop and see what that is. And sure enough, here's this great big puffball, and it was the MOSAIC puffball. Now, again, that one was not edible because when I cut it open, it was already starting to turn color. But when these are young, they're very good edible. And they're kind of squat in appearance. You can see in the photo here, a lot of times they've got kind of a little base to them. They're somewhat pear-shaped, almost more football shaped. And these are found again in temperate zones around the world. So you never know. Now, your giant puffball, it's going to be rounder, and it's not going to have a real distinct, typically not going to have a real distinct base to it, stalk to it, where this one does have more. And again, it's that more oblong or pear-shaped look to it. So, but another good edible, and just a great one to find. You're going to typically find this one alone. You're not going to find it as often in large groups. Not that you can't, but not as often. And again, to reiterate, everything I've said so far varies on your area, your day. You may find them in group, you may find just one. So, take everything with a grain of salt. Now, the key to these is they're edible when the flesh is completely white. So that's another thing I like about the puffball for beginners. They're starting out, you pick this mushroom up and you're thinking, boy, is this edible? I don't know that I want to eat this thing without being sure. Cut it in half. If that flesh is solid and it's white. Now, you see in the picture here, it's just completely solid all the way through. There's no odd really shapes or anything. And there's no yellow or brown. It's just white all the way through. This is an edible puffball mushroom. Now, what we want to really be careful about is any discoloration in there. So on the photo on the left, you can see that there's actually a shape to this. This is actually it's actually another mushroom that has not opened up yet. And so at some point, this mushroom is going to open up and become a gilled cap mushroom. And I apologize, I can't think of the name of this at the moment, but there is actually a specific species that this is. So the more mushroom experts out there will probably comment and know what it is. But again, anytime you see any type of shape in there, any discoloration, that is not an edible puffball. And then on the right, these are kind of blatantly obvious. They're black and brown. You cut that open, there's any color other than pure white. That is not an edible puffball mushroom. So let's talk a little bit about preparation and storage on these puffballs. That's what's really nice about these. They're super, super easy. Again, especially for beginners just getting started. When you look at the smaller puffballs, the pear-shaped, the studded puffballs, you just slice them up, serve them with a little butter and salt. That's one of the best ways to do it. You know, especially when you first start out with any mushroom, you want to eat just a small amount anyway. Now, we're not talking about mushroom poisoning here. What we're worried about at this point is an allergic reaction to the mushroom. I've known people that can't eat chanterelle mushrooms because it gives them, irritates their stomach. So whenever you eat a mushroom for the first time, or if you're introducing that mushroom to someone new, you want to make sure you just do a little bit at the first time. And the best way to do that, I believe, is just saute it with a little butter and salt and just cook it till it's nice and golden brown. This way you get, the real feel and flavor of the mushroom. And it's a great way to introduce them to the difference between these type of mushrooms and what they probably were used to as a kid, maybe the canned mushrooms or store-bought mushrooms that they think they don't like. And so start them off with a small amount, do it this way. It's fun, it's easy, it's quick. It's a great way to get started. You can also just cut them in half, cube them, and saute them with vegetables and meat. Most of the puffballs will just take on any flavor of the seasoning that you're using. And now for the large puffballs, like the giant puffballs, probably my favorite way to use these is to cut them into large slices. Think a 1/4 inch, maybe even a 1/2 inch thick, and then cover it with meat, cheese, vegetables, and then bake it or air fry it. Think like a pizza, like a slice of pizza. Take whatever toppings you want, put it on there, cover it with some cheese, bake it until it's golden brown. And I'm telling you guys, that is a fabulous way to use these giant puffballs. And I mean, your creativity has no ends when it comes to what toppings you use for that. Now, that's a great way to store these too. So when we look at the little small puffballs, they're not really something that you're going to store. You're going to pick them, you're going to eat them at the time, and they're not going to store well. Like any mushroom, they'll store in a refrigerator for a few days, but that's about it. The nice thing about the giant puffballs is when you cut them into those slices, you can take and put them in the freezer and put them on some parchment paper, freeze them individually, and then transfer them into like a freezer bag or a freezer container, and then you can store those for a long time. And then when you're ready to use them, pull them out, put the toppings on them, do the exact same thing, or cube them, however you want to do it. And it's a great way to store them for a longer time. So small ones, not so much, but the large giant puffballs, you can do that with. Now remember, I've talked about how easy these are to identify, how easy they are to know that they're edible, but always, always, always know what you're eating. So, make sure you pay attention to the color. Make sure you pay attention to that white flesh and make sure there's no shapes, no discolorations. Check multiple resources if you're not sure. And when in doubt, ask a local expert. Now, the internet is something more and more people use. And a lot of people say, oh, don't use the internet. And there's some truth to that. I do use the internet, but I use it more as a guide. So usually the internet is what aims me in a direction. So let's say 5 people respond and they say, 3 of them say it's this kind of mushroom, 2 of them say it's this kind of mushroom. And then from there, I'll say, okay, well, 3 out of the 5 think it's this. So then I'll lean more to my resources and lean more towards that mushroom. But I never use the internet as the identifying factor. I see every day people commenting on pictures and they're way off on what they say it is. So if you get a bunch of people responding and you see that there's definitely a theme, a lot of them are going one direction, use your resources to confirm that that is what it is. The rules that my daughter and I started with are pretty simple. We never, and to this day, we never say, I think, I'm pretty sure, or I believe, when it comes to any wild food. So whether it's plants or mushrooms, we don't say, I think this is edible, I'm pretty sure it's edible, or I believe this is an edible mushroom. If any of those words come into play, then we don't eat it. And just keep that in mind and you'll be just fine. So again, these are just a few of the edible puffballs out there. There are others, and there's a lot of inedible puffballs, but these are kind of the key ones. And I just want to do kind of an overview because, again, I really believe these are a great starter mushroom. They're a lot of fun. They're easy to identify, easy to know that you can eat them, easy to prepare, and very easy on the palate for a beginner. So I hope this was informative, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm hopefully going to do some more of these. We'll take a look at some different types of mushrooms. But for now, hopefully the next time you see me, I'm out in the woods and I'm doing something wild.